Welcome to the Smith Publicity All Things Book Marketing Podcast, offering tips, insights, and advice from the best in the publishing industry. Hello, and welcome to this episode of All Things Book Marketing. I'm your host, Olivia McCoy, and our special guest today is Deb Gabor. She is a brand expert, the founder and CEO of Soul Marketing, and a best-selling author of 3 branding books. Hi, Deb. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I'm so excited to talk about author branding, especially post-publication. But let's start with what you do and how you can help authors.
Absolutely. So I like to explain to people that I'm in the business of creating this condition that I call irrational loyalty. And irrational loyalty is when people are so indelibly bonded to a brand, they feel like they were cheating on it if they were to do anything else or work with anyone else or read anything else or buy anything else. And based on the work that I do, we've learned that when brands engender this quality of irrational loyalty, they scale more rapidly, more profitably, with more focus. They have more repeat customers. They're just bigger, better brands. And we've learned on the average, companies and organizations that enjoy irrational loyalty make about 40% more revenue than companies that don't. So it really speaks to the reason why people do that. And so that means that I do brand strategy, branded content, help take brands to market. Specifically for authors, we help them carve out their unique role and relevance and sort of position themselves. Mostly I work with nonfiction authors, helping them sort of establish a footprint and a platform for authority so that they can create the change that they're looking to find in the world, any place they go, and take that authority with them in a portable way across their entire careers and lives.
That sounds incredible. We've talked a little bit about branding on the show before, but why don't you give us a quick recap on what an author brand is and what it looks like?
Sure, sure. So it's important to understand what a brand is. And a lot of people think that a brand is like it's a logo or it's a color scheme or a tagline or something that you're known for. A brand really, there's 2 kinds of branding. I like to refer to big B branding, which is the kind of branding I do, which is strategic branding, which is really all about sort of carving out what is the conceptual space that you occupy in the minds of the customers who are most highly predictive of your success. And then there's little b branding, which if you envision a brand as being kind of like an iceberg, it's the part of the iceberg that you see above the top of the water, which does represent things like color schemes, logos, typography, campaigns and things like that. So a brand is the emotional connection that an author makes with its audience. And it's something that's consistently delivered across not just everything that they write, but everything that they do. I always say actions speak louder than marketing. A brand is more than marketing. A brand is a promise. And that promise is the ultimate benefit, the singular benefit that you're going to deliver to people when they don't just consume your book, but consume any content or thought leadership that comes from you.
What are some good examples of a successful author brand, including your own 3-time best-selling author?
Okay. Yeah. I think about Seth Godin is somebody who has like a very, very clear brand that comes through not just through his writing, but writing, speaking, media. It exists in 360 degrees. I also think like some of the fiction authors that I read this summer, I took a couple weeks long trip to Spain where I spent a lot of time on the beach in Mallorca, and I consumed a lot of what I would describe as chick lit, specifically from one author, Emily Henry. She wrote Beach Read, and then a bunch of others, just like very fun, kind of lighthearted books. There's a brand there. There's a set of expectations, a relationship, some memories, almost a formula that belongs that I have a deep emotional connection with that. Like when I'm looking for something that's like mind candy, I can go straight to that, regardless of what the subject matter is or the storyline is. I know that there's an expectation there that will always be met. And then in the nonfiction world, some of my favorite business books were written by Jim Collins. And, here's a Good to Great, Built to Last, books like that, they go back a very, very long time, but they have longevity, they have staying power, and they're sort of like the definitive works for business strategists. And so, the thing that's common across all of these examples, besides just being like strong brands, is they have consistency, they have a footprint of awareness and authority, they have a unique point of view, there's passion behind what they're writing, and there's a desire to make some kind of a connection with the reader. And so those are some of the characteristics of a really, really good author brand.
And then we talk all the time, both at Smith Publicity and Consulting, and in general in the industry, about how to build up an author brand pre-publication. We know we want to
Yeah.
be building momentum. We know we want to get people excited about the book coming out. We know we want to get pre-sales, all of this. But then it kind of peters off after that because the excitement and the timeliness of that book's publication is gone. And so we don't talk about continued branding. So we do know there's never a time too early to begin your author branding, start building up your network. Is there ever a time that's too late?
No, I'll say there's never a time that's too late. I always say that branding is like an always on activity. And if you're an author or you're thinking about being an author, you're kind of like a startup, right?
Mhm.
And I always say brand early, often, and always sort of have your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there. So no, there really is no time that's too early to think about your brand. Now, I know because you guys have referred people to me and I've referred people to you, like that what you guys do, which really is sort of less about defining the brand and more about
Mhm.
activating the brand in market through
Mhm.
influencers and media, that these two activities are intertwined. And I do know that sometimes it's too early to hire a team to do your publicity if the brand isn't really carved out, it's not well established, like who you are, what you stand for, the change you're looking to see in the world, the consistent message, the footprint and platform for authority that you have as an author. If that's not defined, it makes the job of folks like Smith Publicity very, very different. But the question that you were asking was like, is it ever too late? And I think that my own story is a really good example of it's never too late. So I don't know if you know this, Olivia, but I used to be a publicist. I don't know if you knew,
Ooh, okay, I
but
didn't.
I have that as, like part of the seedy underbelly of my career, but I used to be a publicist. And as a publicist, like there are lots of things that I should have known better. One of those things being like, if I was going to come to market with a book, I probably should have worked on publicity before I did that. But, as the unshod shoemaker's children can tell us, sometimes, we're our worst clients. And I made the switch over to, doing branding consulting, like, a long, long time ago, more than 2 decades ago. So I wrote a book. I wrote a book that I was compelled to write. That very first book that I wrote a book that I was compelled to write. I wrote a good book. I wrote a very popular book. But then what I hadn't thought about was like, how is this book going to serve me in my career? I was so compelled to share my content with other people that I didn't think through all of these things thoughtfully and strategically, like the good former publicist that I was, right? So
It
here I was.
happens.
Yeah, here I was with a book that had been on the market for like, I don't know, by the time I decided, I was like, yeah, you know what? I really need to do some PR around this. By that time, the book had been on the market for like 7 or 8 months or something like that. And, I was having good sales and having speaking engagements and all of that kind of stuff, but I wasn't deliberate about how I wanted that book to serve me in my life, my career, my authority, what I wanted it to do for me personally, what I wanted it to do for me, for my company. I hadn't thought about any of those things. So I was sort of late to the game. The interesting thing was my brand has always been really, really clear. I'm the brand dominatrix, the irrational loyalty lady, right? I'm known for that in all those circles and things like that. So I think it made the job of publicity a little bit easier because I was very clear on my brand. But what the publicity team did, and this is a lesson for everybody post publication, instead of like using my book as as the topic of the conversations that I was to have with media, we used my book as a piece of like referenceable credibility that helped me get into the conversations that I needed to be in with the right people. How did this work? So I want to say I started with Smith in 2017 and or 20 yeah, probably my book came out in 2016. I started with Smith at the beginning of 2017. I was very fortunate that there were a couple of major brand disasters that happened all around the same time. The smart publicists at Smith, they thought, hey, who better to comment on not just what happened, but what's going to happen? What are predictions? What can other organizations learn from these brand disasters? One of them was that Pepsi Kendall Jenner commercial where seemingly Pepsi suggested that we could solve all of society's ills if you could share a can of Pepsi with a riot cop at a completely whitewashed, like Black Lives Matter protest. And then the other thing that happened was United Airlines, they had their big brand disaster where they pulled that poor Dr. David Dow out of a seat on an airplane, beat him senseless. He was bleeding. The video was shared over 11 million times on Twitter and other social media. And we didn't hear from United Airlines for 48 hours. And when we did, it was a 140 character tweet written by a bunch of lawyers, blame the victim, et cetera, et cetera. Two such big stories where, because I had a book, the publicity team was able to get me into conversations with people who were interested in talking about those things from a brand perspective. And my book really was kind of the calling card that was like, not only is she, a 20+ year brand strategist, also she's written this great best-selling book where she talks about brand strategy, and that got me into the right conversation. So it's never too late to think about your brand and what your brand should do with you. The biggest lesson that I learned, and part of the reason why I wrote my most recent book, which is really about this idea of authority, is establish your footprint of authority from the start. Really know, like, is your book the first in a series of books that's going to help you create a platform where you can engage community to share an idea with them that's going to change the state of matter or change the way people live or change the way people think? It, like I said, like a startup, it's always, it's early, always, and often. In my own case, like, I was very fortunate to be able to be in those conversations, because I think over the period, like, this is probably legendary in Smith publicity, but over the course of like the 2 weeks during which those disasters were going on, I don't know, I probably did like 120 interviews with top tier press. I was writing op-eds for Fortune, just like immediately sort of thrust into the conversation because I had a unique point of view which emanated from my brand. I had a very succinct, simple, non-academic, non-esoteric, just sort of down-to-earth way of talking about those things. And finally, the third thing is that I really felt like I was doing this in service of others rather than doing it myself. Does that make sense? That answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. And honestly, I have heard about your campaign before. It is a little bit legendary in the Smith offices. They mentioned it to me when I started 3 years ago. So that's kind of
Okay, all
cool. So
right.
you are kind of famous in the Smith office.
Ooh, well,
And
that's
it
cool. I love that.
also sounds a little bit like using your book maybe as a business card, which is another big thing that Smith talks about all the time. So let's
Yep.
go into some of the best ways that authors can use their books to boost their branding. And like you said, credibility building is a huge one. It's adding another title to your
Mm-hmm.
name. It's adding that credibility that I published and it is resonating with people and it's getting
Yep.
this great visibility. But what other ways can you actively use your book to boost your branding?
So I use my book kind of in the way that the book was written. Like, my first book is about the methodology that we use in our business. I basically give our secret sauce as an organization away for almost free. I mean, for the cost of a book, right? I give that away. It is an artifact of my career success, my knowledge, and also I know this is the big secret about writing nonfiction books, especially business books. I know that if I give the methodology away for free, I don't put it behind a gate, I don't put it behind a paywall. I'm just like, here, have at it. I feel so strongly about this that I want you to have it for $15.99 or whatever. I think you can get it on Kindle for $8.99 or something, right? Like, it's a very, very low cost to do this. I also know that people can't really do it on their own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And So to some extent, it's more than a business card. It's kind of a lead magnet. Now, I did a really, really bold thing in my second book, the Irrational Loyalty book. At the back of the book, in the epilogue or in the acknowledgments, I acknowledge everybody who was part of making that book possible. But I also write like a letter in there to the reader that says something like, you know what, if you don't believe that branding is important, and you don't believe that it can change the trajectory of your organization or you as an individual, here's my proposal to you. Hire me, pay me nothing upfront. And then once we go through the process of really focusing, refining, and articulating your brand, you can pay me what you think it's worth based on whatever stray idea, transformative notion you picked up from working with me. And you'd be surprised. I've had some people take me up on that. So, having a book is um, it is more than just a calling card. It does more than just give you credibility. Like, yeah, it's really cool for me. I'm a professional speaker now too. Like I can walk into a room full of CEOs, and I flash them my credentials and I'm like, I'm here. Not only do I know my stuff and have an interesting way to convey it, and we're going to have fun together, also like here's the credibility. I've written 3 best-selling books on this topic, right? Plus I have a 30+ year career doing this kind of work and my own company for 21 years or whatever. It makes the story a lot easier, and I don't really have to defend myself, because you know what, writing a book is hard.
Yeah, it is.
Writing a book is hard. Like in the circles that I move in, I'm always surprised when I run into an entrepreneur or a business owner who doesn't have a book. But that's because there's the selection bias of the people that I surround myself with. But it's a very small percentage of people who actually can write a book, complete a book, get a book to market, and then actually get people to throw down real hard money to buy it, right? And so that is something that gives credibility. So using it as a lead magnet, using it as sort of an artifact of your authority, using it, I use it for reference material and also for content. So, one of the things about sort of establishing and growing your authority footprint is like you got to be out there all the time. You have to be sharing information. Well, I wrote a couple of books that are all over 200 pages. Like every single word in those books is a piece of content that can be up-leveled, repurposed, atomized, turned into a different form factor, used in a media interview, whatever. That like I have so much content out there in the world that I'm easy to find, right?
I love content chunking. I love content chunking.
Yeah, I
Turn
mean,
your
it's
book
like
into
I
2 years of content.
absolutely every single book, it's like 2 years of content, and then it's 2 years of new content if you're thoughtful and strategic about it. So one of the things that the publicity team at Smith does really well is they have their ear to the ground and they're listening to like what are the trends and the challenges that are going on out there. What are the newsworthy things that are happening? And then they're like, Deb always talks about this thing here. How do we position that particular thing against this sort of, like, I think they call it newsjacking kind of idea. But the idea is like piggybacking on a market level conversation that is happening. You have, like in my case, I have like over 600 pages of book shit that I can use to like enter a conversation about that. Also, excerpts of the book, digital downloads. I've even done blog posts, LinkedIn posts, social media outreach. I send excerpts of my book to clients and potential clients just to be like, what, we were talking about brand values pyramid. Let me send you the short passage from Branding is Sex, all about the brand values pyramid and how this applies to you. So it just from a content perspective, can you imagine any other situation where you would sit down and you would create 2 years worth of content like in one fell swoop? No, you wouldn't. So that's one of the greatest things about the books.
And I know people are worried about giving it away for free. If you give it all away, are they going to buy it? Yes, because they don't want to have to scroll back through your last 2 years of content to read everything. They like it in a nice, easy, accessible format. And also, it's that loyalty that you're talking about. They
Yeah,
see your
yeah.
value, they want to give back, they want to buy into the brand. And I think that's true of fiction as well. I mean, you're promising a certain emotional feeling, a certain theme that's going to connect, something that's going to happen, character development that people are going to love. And they're not going to get
Absolutely.
that from you describing it.
I think about some of my favorite fiction authors of late, like Anne Patchett. I always know what I always know what I'm gonna get. I'm gonna get something that's entertaining. It's gonna be thoughtful. It's gonna be something that's going to challenge me like emotionally. But I'm gonna get something that takes me sort of like as I read it on a journey of self-discovery. Likewise, Barbara Kingsolver, I'm like, all right, I'm going to be really challenged. I'm going to get into a really deep book that's going to make me feel really bad at times. And I'm going to need to put it aside and read some chick lit for a little bit, or go read some of my darn business books, or, like whatever, and then come back to it, get back to it. But it's going to be reflective of what's happening out there in society, kind of in real time. I'm going to relate to these characters. I'm going to probably hate some of them and feel sorry for them. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
like, I know, again, like a brand is a promise, and it's a set of expectations. And for these authors, I mean, these are like top of mind fiction authors, but you always know what you're going to expect. Like when I go to the bookstore, I go to the library, I'm thinking like, what am I in the mood for? What are my emotions? Like what emotions are stirring in me right now? When I can very clearly see on the shelf, I'm like, I know this author, I know what this brand stands for. I know what this is going to give me, right? Likewise, I'm in an airport. I buy a lot of books in the airport, like a lot of
Mhm.
people do. I'm looking for something that's really going to jump out at me. And I want something that I can read over the course of two, like, coast to coast US domestic flights, right? I'm like
Mhm.
one book, I read half of it on the way, half of it on the way home. There's certain authors that I go to all the time where I know I can get that, right?
Mhm.
So that is the essence of branding, is when you project to the world a set of expectations and then you deliver on them every time. And so I tell people like a brand is a construct. It's made up of two parts, the brand identity and the brand image. It's kind of like yin and yang, right? And the brand identity is the part that you own. The brand image is what's reflected back to you. Ideally, you want those things to match. Otherwise, you have a broken brand promise. So, it's like on the odd occasion when I read something, I'm like, okay, well, that was a bomb, right? From an author that I have like has a strong brand, and I have a strong set of expectations. I'm like, oh, that's nothing like any of their other stuff. And we see this all the time where it's like, oh, that was off brand for that person. That's why a lot of authors, like when they want to go off brand, they use nom de plume, right?
Yep.
And because they're like, all right, I don't want to negatively impact my brand equity by doing something that is off brand or off expectation for what people have come to know me for. So if people don't think that branding is part of writing and publishing and being an author, then they're being very short-sighted, because it is a projection to the world. The brand identity, you own this. You're projecting that to the world. The brand image is reflected back. And you can't have one without the other. It's time to take control of the part of it that you own, the identity.
So, the last big question, I'd love to wrap it up with a few actionable things that authors can do post publication to continue growing their brands.
Yes. So if you haven't done it yet, clearly, clearly articulate your brand narrative, your brand foundation. The hint that I give for this, like the branding methodology, really, like the core of the branding methodology is really about these three things. Number one, the best brands in the world become part of the people who use them. Number two, they're not just different, they're unique. Legendary brands are unique. And number three, brands make their customers a hero in their own story. So if you are an author and you are not clear on your brand identity and your brand narrative, your brand foundation, answer these three questions. Three questions. Number one, what does it say about my reader that they read my book? What does it say about them? Number two, what is the one thing that people get from me as an author and my books by extension? What is the one thing, the singular thing they get from me that they don't get from anyone else? And number three, how do you make your reader the hero in their story through the act of reading the book? I'd say, like, so figure out your brand. That's the shortcut for doing it right there. a lot of us want to talk about like what we do and how we do it and all that kind of stuff. This really goes into the idea of putting your reader in the center of the brand and demonstrating how do you become part of them. So that would be tip number one, figure out your brand narrative and do it by answering those three questions. What was the rest of the question? It was like, what are some things that authors
Some
can do
actionable
post-publication?
things. Yep.
Okay, so that's actionable number one. And also, I have free digital downloads on my website that people can go and they can download brand exercises to like really, really dial in their brand. Number two, figure out how are you going to extend your brand beyond book, right? How are you going to get the thoughts, the ideas, the notions, the stories, like the change that you want to see in the world? How are you going to get that out to as many people as possible? It doesn't necessarily have to be in a monetizable way, but how are you going to how are you going to take the content in that book and bring it into the real world, bring it into real life, take it off of the pages or out of like I record my books on audio as well. And so people, they're like, oh, it sounds like you're sitting right next to me. I'm like, yeah, because I read my own books. But how are you going to use all of those different assets to complete a story out there in the world and reach as many people as you possibly can? So that's content. Like really figure out how are you going to use this for content. And then I would say post publication, if you haven't engaged a publicist or you haven't started to like do your own PR and like I don't want to disintermediate you guys because I refer tons of clients to y'all. But at the same time, you can do your own
Mhm.
PR if
No,
you
I
want.
agree.
Cameron Harold wrote a really good book about that and whatever. And so some people it's like it's a budget impossibility to hire a professional publicity team. Figure out what are the market level conversations that are taking place, what's happening in the media, what are the stories that are being told, and how can you have a point of view on those things? And that's mostly for our nonfiction authors, people who are writing about academic subjects or business subjects or things like that. But at the same time, I do believe that people who are writing fiction, there's a way to get into the conversation that's going on at the market level because art imitates life and life imitates art, and these things are really truly intertwined, and really being thoughtful, deliberate, and proactive about engaging people in conversations. Like a book that I just finished was Demon Copperhead, which is like a retelling of David Copperfield by Barbara Kingsolver. But the storyline really focuses on like the opioid epidemic and things
Mhm.
like that. This is something like that is real. It's reality to a lot of people, and this is a sort of a creative articulation of something that is actually happening here. It's very smart if you're an author and you are going there to use the content of your book to like get into conversations or even start conversations. And the last thing I would say is books are a way to create community,
Yep.
right? No matter what kind of book you have. And it's a way to bring people together, like-minded people and then differently minded people, to engage in conversations using the content of your book, like almost as the seed for those conversations. And, I feel like as authors, we, to some extent, like we are writing books, unless we are writing books exclusively for ourselves, which I'll say like the people that I work with in our authority marketing and branding practice, these are all people who are compelled to share with other people. So it's pretty much across the board. But people are writing in the first place because they have something that they want others to know and benefit from. And those ideas can take flight when they are shared with the community, and the community gets to take them and really turn them into their own.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for all this great information. How can our watchers and listeners learn more about you?
I think that the best way to find out is to go to debgabor.com. There's links to all my books. There's video stuff on there. There's those digital downloads are on there. Media kit, get in touch with me, all of that kind of stuff. You can learn all about branding. You can learn about these books, and probably the most important thing, you can find me. You can reach me. So if you do submit something through the website, just mention where we met, because I do a lot of interviews and I do a lot of speaking and stuff like that. Mention where we met, and then I can make sure that we get everybody to the top of the pile.
Apologies for the technical difficulties, everyone, but I want to thank Deb Gabor again for joining us. And listeners, watchers, if you like this episode, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and share with anyone else that might be interested. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Smith Publicity All Things Book Marketing Podcast. To reach us and learn about our many services, visit smithpublicity.com or send us an email to info@smithpublicity.com.